Hello, friends. If you didn't make it to be with us for our gathered worship time this past Sunday, then I'm glad you're here with us. Imagine that you are in grubby clothes and you need to stop by the grocery store, stop by Safeway, just grab a couple things. It's the end of the day. You head inside, you grab a couple things, and while you're grabbing those things, you're starting to feel kind of queasy. You're not feeling real great. Better get out to your car, and you're headed out, and you're just headed outside of those main doors when the feelings really change. All of a sudden, your arm just starts to go numb, and you stop. You're outside the main doors, and oh my, you are not feeling good. The numbness is traveling down your arm. It's traveling up the side of your face, and you're kind of looking around. You are trying to just look, and your vision goes double. All of a sudden, it's like you're seeing two of things, and you your head starts to pound, and you try to take another step. You're like, I got to get to the car, and your balance is all kinds of wiggy. And so it's like, no, I better just lean against this wall here. And you're kind of holding the wall, supporting yourself, not feeling real awesome. And you try to take a step away from the wall, and your balance is all out of whack, and you just fall back against that wall, and you just kind of just slump down right there against the wall, and thinking, "Oh my, I this is not good. I do not feel good at all. Maybe I'll just rest for a moment. No need to freak anyone out just yet. I'm just going to rest for a moment, and then I, I'll get up. I'll go to the car. I'm going to get home. I'll be fine." You try to pull your legs up to stand up, and your muscles are not coordinated at all. You can't get your arms and legs to do what you need them to do. And people are just walking by, they're walking in. And so you try to call out to someone, because now you know, like, I need some assistance here. And the words come out just all kinds of muffled and jumbled. You tried to say, "Somebody please help me," but it's oh. And it's in that moment that you realize, I'm having a stroke, and I can't even call out for help. And there you are. You're slumped against the wall in your grubby clothes, and you're unable to stand up, unable to, you can't wave your arm because your muscles aren't working, and your speech is so slurred that it doesn't make sense. And hopefully someone's going to come and check on you right away. Now, that brings us to a question. Let's say, I know you'd say, I don't want this to happen. I get that. But let's say that this could happen during a busy day, let's say a weekend, when Safeway is just bustling with people going in and out, lots of people around. Or let's say this could happen in the middle of a quiet day when there's nobody around. It's maybe just one or two people that are coming in every now and then. Now, not that any of us wants to have a stroke at all, but if you could choose the option, which option would you go with? Would you say, boy, I would want it to be the busy day when there are tons of people around? Or would you say, no, I'll take the quiet day when there's maybe only one or two people randomly coming in? What would you choose? Take a moment. Uh, if you're with your family, just pause the video and chat. Say what you would choose and why you'd choose that. All right. So, just a little social psychology for you here from Robert Cialdini. So, there's actually loads of studies, research on this. So, for instance, they did a study where a guy appeared to be having an epileptic seizure in public. He's faking it. It's not real. But they were paying attention to how do people respond. If there was one bystander, just one person, the bystander received help 85% of the time. But if there were 5 bystanders, then and I don't know, maybe I messed that up by saying the bystander received help. The epileptic guy received help, sorry. If there were 5 bystanders, the epileptic fellow received help 31% of the time. So one person, they are going to respond 85% of the time. 5 people, this person who needs help only gets help 31% of the time. Another study. So these researchers made smoke seep like out from under the door of a building to make it seem like this place is on fire. So if there's one bystander, they responded 75% of the time in this study. If there were 3 bystanders, they responded 38% of the time. So what's going on here? Well, it's something that social psychologists have documented time and time again, and they call it the principle of social proof, and they call it pluralistic ignorance. So basically, with any situation, if it isn't clear that there's an emergency, for instance, the Safeway story, like there's a person, they're slumped against the wall, they might be having a stroke or a heart attack, they might be high, they might be drunk, and people walking by don't know. And so when a situation is uncertain or unclear, people tend to accept the actions of others as a correct response. They look around. Are other people concerned? Are other people rushing to help? Or is everyone just kind of minding their own business, passing by? And so they're checking what other people are doing. Now, when there are several other potential helpers available, the personal responsibility of each individual is reduced. Because everyone says to themselves, they say, well, someone else will check on that person, or maybe someone else already did check on that person, or help is probably already on the way. And, they say, why should the responsibility to help be on me? There are people whose job it is to help someone like this. There's social workers and paramedics and police, yada, yada. Let the experts handle it. And what happens? The principle of social proof and pluralistic ignorance, what happens is nobody helps. So today we are looking at a story about a person needing help and not being able to receive help, not being able to get it. But before we just jump in to that part of the story, let's get a little background. So One day, a lawyer, an expert in God's law, so think Bible scholar, uh, he comes to Jesus and he asks Jesus, he says, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" It's a common question. Rabbis and lawyers of the day like to debate that kind of question. And so Jesus responds, he says, "Well, what's written in the law? And how do you read it?" Well, this lawyer must have heard Jesus speak before and teach before, because this lawyer quotes to Jesus the same scriptures that Jesus likes to quote, the same scriptures that Jesus has been saying are most important. He comes back and he says, "Well, I think it's love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your strength, and all your mind." That's the Shema. Everyone knows it. And then he grabs this other kind of obscure verse that Jesus has been talking about: love your neighbor as yourself, Leviticus 19:18. And Jesus responds, "You've answered correctly. Do this and you will live." Good talk. End of conversation. Except that it isn't. So you see, this lawyer is trying to drill down to a different question. Uh, he just he's taking a while to get there. He's trying to justify himself and who he reserves his love for. You see, it's his job as Bible scholar, lawyer, this expert in God's law. It's his job to keep his community, Jewish community, alert to anyone who's bringing in some kind of like religious funny business. So he's testing Jesus. Like, how's this Jesus guy read the Bible? Uh, so his real question to Jesus doesn't have anything to do with eternal life. His real question, here it is. He finally says, "Okay, so who is my neighbor?" Now, Jesus has already identified the issue that's going on. His very first response is, "Okay, what's written and how do you read it?" He's already, the issue is selective Bible reading. It's which Bible verses are you going to pick and choose in order to prop up the way that you want to treat other people? Like, where's the line between neighbor and non-neighbor? You see, this lawyer, he quoted Leviticus 19:18, which says, "Do not seek revenge, do not bear a grudge against anyone among your people, but love your neighbor as yourself." Now, among your people, the Jewish teachers of the law argued that neighbor meant fellow Israelite, your people. After all, they know, like, the Gentiles aren't your neighbors, and certainly God hates the Samaritans. They aren't your neighbors. All you have to do is go back to the stories of the people of Samaria, like 2 Kings chapter 1, when Elijah actually calls down fire on these Samaritans that are trying to round him up, stuff like that. So you say, okay, how's this selective Bible reading? Well, you know that verse he quoted, Leviticus 19:18, among your people, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, it's just our people. Well, if you keep reading that same chapter, it clears it up. It says, verse Leviticus 19:34, it says, "When a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not mistreat them. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself." There's that same phrase. "For you were foreigners in Egypt. I am the Lord your God." So this question, who's my neighbor? Well, it's a question of which verse is going to define neighbor. Is it going to be verse Leviticus 19:18, or is it going to be Leviticus 19:34? Is my neighbor an Israelite, or is my neighbor a foreigner? What is written? How do you read it? And of course, this is still a live wire issue today, as we all know. So how's Jesus respond to this question, who's my neighbor? Well, he tells a story. He says, all right, there's this guy and he's traveling. It's 17 miles from Jerusalem, which is up high, down to the suburb of Jericho, suburb of Jerusalem. 17 miles. It's really steep, rugged, dry country with a massive elevation drop. You're dropping 3,200 feet or so. And just for perspective, this is like 4.5 times as steep as going from the summit of Highway 6 down to Tillamook. So think about how steep that highway is, and then go like this is a real steep stretch of road, path, rocky path. So everyone knows this road is a good place to get robbed. It's dangerous. The peasants in the area have lost their land to elite money lenders, and so they have banded together into local gangs, bandits. And what better place to rob the rich than as they're on their way from the suburb to the city and back and forth, the commute to and from the city. So normally they don't beat you unless you resist, which unfortunately this man resists. And so they beat him half dead. They strip him of all his clothing, and there he lay in desperate need of help. So along comes a priest. He's leaving Jerusalem. He's headed back home to Jericho. Priests are wealthy in that day, and so that means he can afford a nice ride. So he's got a good donkey or what have you. About half of all priests in the day lived in the wealthy suburb of Jericho. So this guy, he's probably finishing a 2-week stint being on assignment, priestly duties in Jerusalem. He's on his way home to his family. And as he comes along, here's a naked, half dead man on the side of the road. But of course, to the priest, is he alive? Is he dead? It's hard to tell. And the priest looks away immediately, starts reasoning. The fact that this guy is knocked out and naked, it really presents a problem. It presents a Bible problem. Purity? Do I do the purity verses here, or do I do the mercy verses here? So this guy, he's naked. He could be Jewish. He could be Greek. He could be Syrian, Phoenician, Egyptian, you name it. Who knew? Because the way that you figure out the us versus them, the way you figure out who he is and where he's from, it has to do with the way he's dressed, and it has to do with his accent. That's how you figure it out. Well, if you're knocked out and you don't have your clothes on, this guy could be literally anyone. So if he's Jewish, then the priest should help for sure. But if he's a Gentile, if he's a foreigner, the priest doesn't have to do anything. And anyways, he looks at this guy. He looks like he might be dead. And so if the priest touches a dead body, then he's going to have to turn around. He's going to have to go back into Jerusalem. It's going to be a week's worth of ceremonial cleansing that he has to go through, because priests aren't allowed to touch dead bodies. That's like Leviticus 21:11, can't do it. And then it's gotten even more souped up where it's like his shadow can't even touch this dead body. And while he's going through that week of purification, it's going to mess up his income, because his family and his servants won't even be allowed to collect on the tithes. So it's going to mess up his entire life if he basically bends over this guy to check for a pulse, and if that body's dead, it's going to mess things up for the next week. So, well, all right, but I mean, you're out there in the boonies, so why doesn't he just check on the guy? He doesn't have to tell anyone. Just is there a pulse? Is this guy shake him? Whatever. He doesn't have to tell anyone he checked. Well, there are stories of priests who tried to get away with that kind of thing. They were ceremonially unclean, and they tried to just kind of fudge and go ahead and serve in their priestly duties. And then they were found out, and those priests had their brains clubbed out of them by other priests. A super violent response. So it's not worth the risk. It's not worth the risk of saying, well, I'll just check, and if he's dead, I'll just keep on going. So what's the priest do? He just scoots by on the far side of the road, far side of the path, which, depending where he's at, I mean, he might almost have to step over this guy, but he does his best, careful not to touch him, even with his shadow. Well, coming behind him is a Levite. They're both commuters down to Jericho. They probably know one another because the Levites are the assistants to the priests. Now, you remember the principle of social proof and pluralistic ignorance that we were talking about? The greater number of people, the more personal responsibility is reduced. So here comes the Levite. He sees this guy. He looks away and he starts reasoning. Well, the priest didn't do anything. He didn't stop. He didn't throw him over his donkey, so that probably means that maybe this guy's dead. And what's the use in helping a dead guy? And without any clothes, he might be anyone. I bet the priest, when he gets down into Jericho, he'll let someone know what happened. And of course, I can't touch a dead body because that thing's still in play. And so, the priest, he already set the precedent for how we're responding. Like if your boss says it ain't a big deal, then it ain't a big deal. That's that. So the Levite, he scoots by quickly, same as the priest, goes on his way. Now, everyone knows the way these stories go. As Jesus is telling this story, it's like, okay, yeah, we know what you're doing. Yeah, first it comes a priest, then a Levite, and then an Israelite. So go ahead, Jesus, tell your story. But the story detonates in the lawyer's face, goes off. Along comes a Samaritan. What? A Samaritan? What is a Samaritan doing on the road between Jerusalem and Jericho? You are a long way from home, Toto. For a Samaritan to be that far away from home, that means this guy has to be a traitor. The traitors are the ones who get rich at the expense of others, and they are thieves. And talk about a person, an occupation that is completely despised. The priest and the Levite, when they saw this this half dead naked guy just laying there, their very first response is their reasoning, and they're reasoning their way to a decision. What am I going to do? They have to consider the implications of the decision. They have to consider all the possible victims in this situation. You got to pit all the Bible verses, one against the other, pit all the traditions against one another. But this Samaritan in Jesus' story, when he saw the man, there's no reasoning. There's just a gut reaction. His guts turn inside out with compassion because he knows what it is to travel in a dangerous land where you might become a victim at any moment. And he knows what it is to have no one to help you. And his guts just churn as he sees these wounds on this man. And man, that must hurt so bad. This guy's going to need some serious help. And there's no reasoning, there's no weighing the options. He sees the guy and immediately he feels compassion. His guts just turn inside out with that pain. And immediately he's hopping off of his donkey and he's digging through his stuff and he's pulling out everything he's got, cloth for bandages and olive oil and wine, and he just sets about doctoring this guy as best he can. And then he takes this half-dead naked guy and heaves his way up as best he can and gets him up there on the donkey. Now this is where things become dicey. When you are a Samaritan and you're riding into the wealthy suburb of Jericho with a naked, half-dead guy slumped over your donkey, you are asking for vigilante justice. They might shoot and ask questions later, kind of a thing. The Samaritans and the Jewish folks, they didn't just hate one another. History tells us these stories about them, they desecrate one another's holy sites. And there are stories of entire groups of travelers being massacred. This last summer, when Black Lives Matter riots were really at their peak. So imagine if a black man got pulled over in a white neighborhood, and in the back of his rig, he's got a half-dead, shot-up white guy, police officer, in the back of his car. What's going to happen? Will he have a chance to explain himself, or will it be one of those shoot first, ask questions later kinds of responses? That's the kind of scenario that this Samaritan is in. He's taking this shot up, this half-dead, wounded man into Jericho, and it might mean his own life. This is sacrificial love. Now, the only place that he can take him in Jericho is an inn, and the inns are notorious for being dangerous and dirty. This isn't a Holiday Inn. Like they will sell you into slavery if you don't pay your bill. But what options does he have? And so the Samaritan carries, stumbles his way into town, gets a room, and spends all night taking care of this guy. Could be anyone. In the morning, the Samaritan's ready to get out of town. Who knows what stories have been spreading around, but it's time to get out of town. So he gives the innkeeper enough money to cover new clothes for this guy, food, enough for him to stay for a week or two. And he tells the innkeeper, he says, look, this is an all expenses paid recovery. Whatever he needs, when I come back, I'll take care of the rest of the cost. And so the guy is covered. The guy, he receives the help. Now Jesus turns to the lawyer who's asking, who is my neighbor? He says, which of these three do you think became a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? He doesn't ask ask or answer, who is my neighbor? Who became a neighbor? Now, nothing could be more humiliating for the lawyer than being forced into follow the example of a Samaritan. He can't even bring himself to say the word Samaritan as he answers Jesus. He kind of puts his head down and he mumbles. He says, well, I suppose it's the guy who had mercy on him. And Jesus says, go and do likewise. The lawyer wants the answer to the question, who is my neighbor? And he wants justification for the way he reads his Bible. He wants justification for reserving his love for those who are his same nationality and religion, ethnicity, class. And sadly, the lawyer isn't alone. Our world is fraught with people who want to draw dividing lines and walls between who's a neighbor and who isn't a neighbor. And Jesus doesn't even address the question the way the lawyer phrases it. Who's my neighbor? Jesus says, no. To whom must you become a neighbor? Kenneth Bailey does fabulous work on this question. That the answer that is obvious in Jesus' story is, to who must I become a neighbor? To anyone in need. Because the victim in the story, that guy laying there naked and half dead, he could be literally anyone. There are no social markers to say, well, he's this person. At the heart of Jesus' story is something that happens instantly whenever we encounter someone in need, or it just doesn't happen. It's whenever we see suffering of any kind, what happens to our guts? Does compassion happen where our guts just churn with someone else's pain, or does reasoning happen? You start trying to come up with, well, why I can't give help, or try to invent some alternative victims who might suffer if you do help. Like, well, if we do this for them, then that might mess up things for someone over here. Or saying this doesn't fit my agenda, my framework, the way that I see the world. But compassion is, I simply embrace someone else with my guts and feel their situation. It's not just a story that touches us when we're walking in a safe way. It's a story that should touch us as we read our Bibles. Jesus, that an original question, like, what is written and how do you read it? That's where this whole thing starts. And so it means I have to have a constant awareness as I read my Bible that I could pick and choose verses just like the lawyer was doing to prop up my reasons for not giving love to people who aren't like me. They aren't my nationality or my ethnicity or my race or gender or orientation or religion or class or what have you, whatever you want to say. But the victim in that story is a unidentifiable person. He could be anyone. So I want to close today with a quote from Mother Teresa. She says, if we have no peace, it is because we have forgotten that we belong to each other. To whom must I become a neighbor? I pray that you will chew on this. Love you, friends.